I don't know how long you want to hear my journey, but I mean, I'll be really quick. I went to BITS Pilani a long time ago. So my journey started with doing a combination of biological sciences and electronics engineering. It was a dual degree, and BITS was unique that way. It offered this dual degree concept. And once I completed that, I just felt like, okay, the natural next step would be to go into biomedical engineering, to combine the two. And that's what I ended up doing. I did my master's in biomedical engineering, and during my master's in the US, I did quite a bit of research in cardiac electrophysiology in the field of defibrillation and pacing, and that really got me interested. That laid the foundation of my career in medical devices. After that, I entered the industry and went from building pacemakers, cardiac defibrillators to neurostimulators. It's a brain pacemaker, and came back to the field of pacemakers again when I joined the company NanoStem. Um, and then that got acquired by Abbott, and recently, like last year, um, me and my co-founder Alan, we founded this company, and I decided to leave Abbott to pursue this full time. And I started my career as a even though I did electrical engineering, I started my career as a firmware engineer, which is a very low-level software engineer. And but I always had an eye on the market and what's going on in the medical device field. I never really kind of isolated myself and just, okay, let's go just write software, right? So I'm always like reading publications, attending conferences, and I was always fascinated by what's out there. And that's, I think, was one of the key to kind of keep me abreast of all the ongoing technology and enable me from going from just a software engineer to kind of build into a more business oriented person, right? Yeah, ideas only the very beginning, right? Ideas, come and go,
True.
but it has to translate to a clinical need, right? So that's very important. And sometimes people think, oh, I have this brilliant idea, and does it really translate to a clinical need? And what is a clinical need? Clinical need is basically, are there other products out there? Is this going to benefit the patients? Um, and are physicians going to adopt this? And so clinical need comes in various steps. And first is, a research. There's all kinds of research going on in the universities, and some new research may have uncovered a technique or technology that could cure a disease or fix a condition in the patients. That's an organic way of uncovering a clinical need. Sometimes a need just arises, uh, you know, based on what the technology is out there, and companies determine. Like, for example, Medtronic and Abbott sell these products called implantable cardiac monitors. 20, 30 years ago, you know, people didn't really, need something like that, or didn't realize that they would need it. And they came up with this idea, and now it's a really useful product. And sometimes the need has always been there, but the technology hasn't caught up, right? So, for instance, the leadless pacemakers have been around for like 75 years or a long time. And, for over 50 years, people have been toying with this idea of leadless pacemaker, making the pacemaker small enough to put it inside the heart. But the technology wasn't there 50 years ago or 30 years ago, but we made it feasible 10 years ago, right? So technology also has to catch up to fit the need. And in most cases, it's just a matter of what products are out there and how can we make it better. right?
Right.
So the need has already been established. There are existing products, but technology is getting better and better. How can we make the product better? Like X-rays. X-rays have been around for a long time, but now it went from traditional X-rays on films to something called computed radiography to now direct radiography, where the X-ray is captured on selenium plates and directly transferred to digital media, right? So technology, you also need to look at existing products and how can new technology change that paradigm. That's another way to identify new technology. Yeah, that is true. I mean, it doesn't have to come from definitely the clinical need has to be there, but sometimes the technology comes first. Sometimes people come up with the technology and then they're like, oh, where can this fit? But
Right.
there has to be a fit, right? You have a cool technology doesn't mean you can just go sell it. I mean, you have to, both has to work out. Yeah, safety is paramount in medical devices, right? So every step of the way we think about safety, every line of code you write and every requirement is built around safety. And this is not like a cell phone that we build that, if it crashes one day, you'll just restart it and move on. A pacemaker cannot miss a beat at all, right? So
Right.
safety it's a very different way of thinking when you're working on a medical device compared to any other, technological product, where you can always say, okay, there's an error, you restart and let the patient push a reset button or whatever, right? So in the medical devices, that's not the case. You cannot miss a beat. And you every requirement you write, you kind of think about it, and there's quality system. There are a lot of documents that you put together, like hazard analysis and FANICAs and whatnot, that talks about um, what could go wrong. I mean, if you're dealing with a big speed, what could go wrong? I mean, is it too high of voltage, too low, too fast? Fundamentals. I mean, then if for every one of those hazards that you identify, you have to have a mitigator. Okay, if something goes wrong, if the battery dies, battery drains too fast, what will happen? What will the product do? So, um, this every step of the way you have to think about it and have a mitigator in place. But at the end of the day, it's every product has, there's no medical device out there that's 100% safe. I mean, makers have complications, but then what is it's cost versus benefit analysis, right? So a pacemaker patient cannot function without a pacemaker. So even if there's a minuscule amount of risk, the pacemaker has to have the pacemaker, but the benefit has to vastly outweigh the risk. Success. Yeah, so I mean, regulatory hurdles are fairly well defined. I mean, if you look at FDA, there's guidance in place. And typically, if your product is, you have to think about if your product is similar to an existing product out there, right? So then you look at the existing product and what kind of pathway they went through. Um, I mean, in most cases, that is true. So a lot of people are developing devices that have been done before, and you're just developing a better version of it. So it makes it a little easier in the sense that a similar product has been developed and the safety has been proven. So you go look at uh, the guidance and the regulatory pathway that that company took to see how many patients they had to test it on, and what was the safety profile, and what were the challenges that they faced, and how can we address that, and how many patients do we have to do. So usually, the pathway is fairly streamlined, but if you have a brand new product that hasn't been developed before, then it could be a little bit more challenging, but still, an agency like FDA has what's called pre-sub meetings that you can schedule a meeting with the FDA, and they're happy to help outline, okay, what could your pathway look like? These are the number of patients you got to show safety, and these are the number of patients you got to do efficacy, and what will that protocol look like, and double-blinded versus, whatnot, right? So I think it's I don't want to call it evil, but it's a necessary evil. But it is, there has to be a regulatory agency that has to oversee this because otherwise, it's so the regulatory agency has to oversee this, and it's been pretty fairly streamlined, and there's guidance in place, and the experts who deal with the regulatory pathway are um, are very knowledgeable in the field, and they will help kind of build the gap between the company and the regulatory agency and make sure that that pathway is. Yeah, so I mean that's essential. It's not nice to have, right? So clinical trial is essential. So you've built your product, you've done all your simulation, bench testing, animal testing, and now um, you have to show the benefit in and the safety and benefit in a patient and that in patient population, and that's a that's really the final step before you get to the market. And yeah, so the clinical trial is the most important thing. And when you get to clinical trials, you basically identify an independent private um, principal investigator, not private investigator,
Right.
principal investigator, PI. And that PI, it's typically a physician who is an expert in this field, and they manage the study, they ensure compliance and ethical conduct during the study, and they ensure proper reporting of the data, and they manage the conflict. So the company at that point is not um, the data is blinded, the company is not influencing the data in any way, so the PI is managing the trial, and ultimately the safety of the patients is very important. So during clinical trials, rarely you do have challenges. Your product has some challenges with the patients. So sometimes you have to pause the clinical trial, and you may have to go back to your drawing board and make some changes to your design and restart the study. And so clinical trial is mandatory and important for um, to it and it's a controlled way of so you can't just test your devices on animals and start selling it. So it's a very controlled way of rolling out in humans and figuring out the challenges, and then you go commercially market it. I don't think there is a product out there that is purely one discipline, right? Maybe there are, but typically in the devices that I've been involved, which is implantable medical devices, there's so many disciplines like mechanical, software, hardware. Um, and as a startup, when you start to think about a product, you kind of whoever it is, the VP of engineering or a program manager appointed by the by the CEO, they look at the product and say, okay, we need mechanical aspects, hardware, software, clinical quality, all these disciplines are needed, and they need to assess what is the effort of each discipline, right? Some products could be heavy on mechanical or heavy on software, so they need to assess, okay, we need X number of mechanical hardware or whatever, and also the time when you start those disciplines, like ultimately you have to cross the finish line together, right? But you may not always start the start line together. So typically, for instance, in implantable medical devices, the hardware comes first, and without the hardware, there is no software. So the software folks are hired, or they come on board a little later, and clinical folks also similarly, clinical folks come a little later. So the program manager then um, consults with these different disciplines, the leaders of different disciplines, to figure out the effort needed, the time needed for them to do what they're supposed to do. And that person will put it all together and make sure that how many people are needed and when they need to start so that they all end at the same time, right? That's the most. And so they conduct meetings regularly to make sure there's communication in between the disciplines and they're talking to each other, any challenges, and the technology is handed over from one to the other. The hardware is needed for the software folks to work on, and if there are challenges in those meetings, they address that. So there's definitely a lot of communication that goes on between, and typically the program manager is like the liaison between these and making sure everything, you know. Yeah, that, during product development, you basically follow all the structure and guidance and you do all your testing, bench testing and, simulations and animal testing. GLP is a very rigorous animal testing that you got to do um, with an independent authority to oversee the data collection. So after all that, and then you train your physicians to do your clinical trials, um, and and typically, by the time you do a clinical trials, you iron out some of the challenges. Um, and by the time you commercially sell your device, most of the challenges are addressed. But still, um, during clinical trial, everything is controlled and structured, and there's staff from your company hand holding every single, product implant and all that. But once you go commercial, there are some challenges that you don't anticipate. I mean, there's now you're selling at a mass scale. You cannot have, you know, that many of your employees out there hand holding and managing the implants and all that. So now the doctors, you just trust the doctors, even though every single doctor goes through training to use your device. Um, every doctor is different and the style is different, and sometimes the way they use the device could be different, and you do find challenges. And typically, some of the challenges that we've faced are, you've tested a device on the bench or healthy animals or in a subset of patients, and then once you roll out commercially, there could be some patients that are sicker than you thought. Like, for a pacemaker, for instance, if you take some old patients, they have very thin heart walls, right? You put our device in there, um, there could be some, challenges in that particular patient. Or sometimes we've noticed that the size of the patient, even though our device is, let's say, I'm talking about leadless pacemaker as an example, if it is approved for adults, in some adults may be really short or small, and the heart is very small. And at that point, it's up to the physicians to determine, okay, is this patient, is this device appropriate for this patient, or is the device going to be too big for this patient, right? So, and that's up to the physician to decide. And sometimes, now due to high volume, now there's a lot more patients having our devices, and cosmic radiation. Devices are prone to cosmic radiation, and we've seen this in the past. Rare, but what a cosmic radiation could do is it could corrupt memory in a device, for instance, especially if you're high altitude flying in a plane with one of our devices. It's very small, but statistically possible that it could cause corruption. And but you do anticipate these problems and design around it. So what will happen if there's a memory corruption, and there are safety in place to kind of safely restart the device or fix the memory corruption, or stuff like that. So you do anticipate some of these, but still in rare situation, the patient finds themselves in a different radio frequency field, that we haven't tested our device, and that could cause some noise in the system and signal, device corruption and whatnot. So again, it's all rare, but it's just don't know the situation where the patients could go through. I'm not a psychic. I don't know what's going to come tomorrow, but I think, sitting here in Silicon Valley, generative AI is the big thing. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's, maybe it'll affect medical devices, but maybe not. But I mean, but there are other technology. What research could identify as a new potential uh, devices that's yet to be seen? There are new research coming out every day, and that could result in new technology and devices. But looking at just existing devices, how can we improve? I mean, uh, there's Neuralink out there doing brain implants to kind of help with brain-machine interface, helping with paraplegic patients. I think neuro is a field that's being vastly, it's very young. So cardiac field has been explored quite a bit. Have been explored quite a bit, but neuro is a very, I've been part of a neuro company in the past, and it's a very brain is a very complicated organ. It's very understand and very. So I see a lot of innovations coming in the brain area, stroke rehabilitation, and stroke is a big problem, and it's just very hard to deal with patients and
Yeah.
cure them, and that's a big field. But I think in the existing field, um, I think battery technology and chip technology, as they get better and better, like battery is the biggest component of any implantable device. If the battery gets smaller, or if the solid state batteries are coming up where you can recharge it and it lasts for a long time, that could, make the device much smaller, and it could open doors for new technology to come together. Uh, the battery technology as well as chip technology, low power implantable devices draw a lot of current, and they have a limited life because of the current draw. And as you have technology coming up with draws lower and lower power, it's absolutely helpful. I mean, whether um, so typically for big companies, they can afford market research reports, and and market research in any form is super useful. And especially a CEO like me starting out, building a company, I had to go understand what does the market need, right? So is there a clinical need for this product, and what is that product going to look like? And I can do that by doing primary research or secondary research.
Right.
And I can purchase one of those reports. But it depends. I mean, like established market research reports are useful, particularly for companies that are trying to explore what's coming out in a particular known domain, right? So but if it's a brand new product, brand new concept, startups typically have to rely on doing their own market research, and that's what I did. I hired an agency, GRG, do that, and in if you do, then we can explore that option in the future. But I have worked with this agency in the past, so I called them and I used them to line up 50 physicians, and I had a set of questions, and I sent it to this organization. They sent it to the physicians, and I collected the answers, and within a week or two, I had all the answers. So I absolutely value. I think if people don't do market research, they're going to miss out. I think a lot of times people they think they have experience in this field and they can just go, oh, I know what I need to build, and I know this is what it's gonna look like. You'll be surprised. I mean, it's just a matter of changing the form of the device slightly, or extending the longevity, or adding a feature could make or break the company. And I think market research is absolutely one of the most important things, one of the earliest things you have to do. And I absolutely value that. A lot of times, if you ask the KOLs, okay, would you like this feature? Would you like that feature? They may say yes to everything, right? So, I mean, as a company, you can't deploy all of them, but at that point, you need to figure out rank order. What is the, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's where a marketing agency could frame it, in a way that to extract that rank order, and that's also very important. No, that's absolutely true, and that's I went through a similar market research myself, and yeah, that I've done that. I've done that for various companies in the past, like 4 or 5 times, and every time I find it super useful. Sometimes I've done it an online survey that I deployed to 100 physicians, and sometimes I've conducted a limited number, 10, 25 doctors.